Hey everyone, Hidden Observer here. Have you ever noticed how often your mind wanders into another world? Not because you're trying to ignore reality, more so because somehow reality feels easier to understand after you spent time imagining something else. Maybe it's a novel you've been writing, or a television show you can't stop thinking about. Maybe an imaginary conversation, could be a fictional city, could be a fantasy world you've been building in your head for years, or maybe it's simply asking yourself, what if? For most of history, people told stories around campfires. Today we stream them, we write them, we animate them, we imagine them. Some people even spend years constructing entire worlds that no one else will ever see. At first glance, it can seem like an escape. But what if it's not? What if stories aren't pulling us away from reality? What if they're helping us return to it? The modern world asks us to process more information in a single day than our ancestors might have encountered in weeks. Every morning we wake up to breaking news, political conflict, economic uncertainty, natural disasters, scientific breakthroughs, artificial intelligence, social media, infinite opinions, infinite noise. The human mind wasn't built to carry the weight of the entire planet all at once. So perhaps it does something remarkable. Perhaps it begins telling stories, not because stories replace reality, but because stories organize reality. They take chaos and give it shape. Because the moment something becomes a story, it has characters, it has conflict, it has meaning, direction, and maybe even hope. If stories really do help us survive, the next question becomes, why? What is it about stories that the human mind finds so comforting? I don't think it's simply because stories are entertaining. Sure, entertainment is part of it, but it doesn't explain why every civilization throughout history has created myths. It doesn't explain why children naturally invent imaginary worlds without anyone teaching them how. It doesn't explain why adults continue reading novels, watching films, creating television shows, playing role-playing games, or imagining entire universes that exist nowhere except inside the human mind. So, I think stories do something much deeper. They create order. Just think about what reality often feels like. It's random, it's messy, it's unpredictable. One day can completely change the next. Good people suffer, bad people sometimes prosper. Questions go unanswered. Life rarely follows a script, but stories do. Stories have beginnings, they have endings, they have purpose. Even tragedy usually means something by the end. That doesn't make stories unrealistic, though. It just makes them understandable. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that storytelling has ever given humanity. Not certainty, but structure. When life just is too impossible to organize, our imagination quietly begins building frameworks that make it easier to carry. Maybe that's why we return to the same fictional worlds over and over again. Not because they're perfect, but because they make sense. They remind us that confusion can eventually become understanding, that struggle can become growth, that even suffering can fit into a larger picture. The worlds that we create aren't always attempts to leave reality behind. Sometimes they're practice, you could say. Practice for courage, practice for hope, practice for loss, practice for becoming the kind of person we want to be. In that sense, imaginary worlds aren't walls separating us from life. They're sort of like bridges. They allow us to walk into difficult emotions at a pace our minds can actually handle. And maybe that's why stories have never disappeared. Technology changes, civilizations rise and fall, languages evolve, but storytelling remains because long before stories entertained us, they helped us understand ourselves. One of the most fascinating things about stories is that they let us experience emotions without paying their full price. I mean, think about it, really. We can feel fear without being in real danger. We can experience loss without actually losing someone we love. We can celebrate courage without ever picking up a sword or climbing a mountain. Stories create a safe place to practice being human. And I don't think that's accidental. Every great story places someone in the middle of uncertainty. A hero, a family, a traveler, a detective, someone who doesn't know what comes next. In other words, someone who looks a lot like us. Because if we're honest, none of us really knows what comes next. We're all trying to figure life out one decision at a time. Stories don't remove uncertainty, they just remind us that uncertainty can still have meaning. That's why I don't believe we become attached to fictional characters simply because they're entertaining. We become attached because, in some small way, we recognize ourselves in them. We see our own fears, our own hopes, our own failures, our own questions. A story can be like a mirror in a way, just as much as it's like a window. It's a window into another world, but a mirror reflecting our own. And, maybe that's why people return to the same stories over and over again. Not because they've forgotten what happens, but because they've changed. The story hasn't become different, they have. And somehow the same words speak differently to a different version of themselves. That's something facts rarely do. Facts inform us. Stories transform us. Not because they tell us what to think, but because they invite us to imagine what it would feel like to become someone else, to walk another path, to make another choice, to face another impossible situation. For a little while, our imagination quietly expands the boundaries of our own experience. And when we return to everyday life, we often bring something back with us. A new perspective, a little more courage, a little more compassion, a little more hope. Perhaps that's why stories have survived every civilization that ever told them, because they don't merely entertain the human mind, they prepare it. So, if stories can strengthen us, then an important question naturally follows. Can we ever become too attached to them? I think the answer is yes, but not for the reason people usually assume. The problem isn't that imaginary worlds exist. The problem is whether they send us back into reality or keep us from returning at all. Think about a shelter during a storm. No one would argue that shelter is a bad thing. In fact, it's exactly where you're supposed to go. The mistake would be believing the shelter was meant to become your permanent home. I think stories often work the same way. Sometimes life becomes too overwhelming. Grief, loneliness, uncertainty, failure, loss. During moments like those, fiction can become, you know, a place to breathe, a place where our minds can recover enough to face another day. And that's not weakness, that's just part of being human. But eventually, the story ends, the final page is turned, the credits roll, the screen fades to black, and sooner or later, we step back into our own lives. The beautiful thing is that we rarely return empty-handed. Oftentimes, we bring something back with us. A new idea, a different perspective, a little more courage than we had before, maybe a little more hope. That's what makes stories so remarkable. The best ones don't ask us to abandon reality, they prepare us to re-enter it. When people say, that book changed my life, or that movie helped me through a difficult situation, they're usually not saying they wanted to stay inside the story forever. They're saying the story gave them something they could carry into the real world. And maybe that's what healthy imagination has always been. Not escape from reality, but a conversation with it. A place where difficult questions become easier to ask, where impossible situations become easier to explore, where hope becomes easier to imagine. Because once we can imagine a better future, we're often much more willing to build one. And maybe that's the greatest gift that stories have ever given us. Not another world to live in, but the strength to return to this one. And as technology continues to evolve, I don't think our need for stories is going to disappear. If anything, I think it's becoming even more important. AI can generate worlds, virtual reality can immerse us inside them. Interactive storytelling is becoming more sophisticated every year. The way we experience stories may change, but I don't think the reason we tell them ever will. Because beneath every novel, every film, every TV show, every fairy tale, every myth, every imaginary world is the same timeless question: what does it mean to be human? Stories have always been our way of exploring that question, sometimes through ordinary people trying to do the best they can, sometimes through creatures and civilizations that could never exist, yet somehow they always lead us back to ourselves. I think that's why stories matter so much, not because they're distractions, not because they're fantasies, but because they give us a language for experiences that are already just too difficult to explain any other way. Hope, grief, wonder, love, fear, purpose. Those things are bigger than facts alone. Stories give them shape. Maybe that's why every culture in every corner of the world has always told them. Not because humans accidentally invented storytelling, but because storytelling emerged wherever humans gathered. Maybe that's no coincidence. Maybe stories are one of the oldest technologies we've ever created. Not a technology of machines, but a technology of meaning. A way of passing wisdom from one generation to the next. A way of reminding each other that we're not alone. A way of imagining tomorrow before it arrives. So maybe the next time you find yourself getting lost in a novel, watching your favorite television series, building an imaginary world, or simply asking yourself, what if? Don't be so quick to dismiss it. You may not be running away from reality. You may be doing something humans have done since the very beginning, trying to understand it. Because in the end, stories don't replace life, but they certainly illuminate it. And maybe that's why, no matter how much our world changes, humanity will never stop telling them. Thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. I really appreciate it. Much love, and see ya.